Our third speaker is Andrew Catella. The Power of Failure. The Power of Failure, Andrew Catella.
Nothing focuses the mind like failure. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and yes, I went to Brooklyn Technical High School, where we were told that we were engineers. But when we got to college, we were told, look around you, because those around you will not be there when you graduate. And they weren't kidding. There was a 50% attrition rate every single semester. By the end of the first term, all the Brooklyn Tech football players transferred to phys ed. I got 3 Bs. The next term, I got all Cs. But the third term, that's where I got my real education. I got a D and an F in my engineering courses. I was kicked out of engineering. Now, this was very frustrating. I found this deeply disturbing. This was not just my education, my future, my career. Already barely 20 years old and already a failure. So I found a way to take one more engineering course just to prove I could handle it. And I studied, I applied myself. And then came the big day, the final exam. And who walked in to administer the exam? The professor who failed me. And I swear he had a sadistic gleam in his eye when he saw me sitting there. He walked in like he owned the place. He said, okay, you need a problem for your final, so here it is. A 100-pound boy rides his bike 20 miles an hour off a cliff 100 feet high. Tell me everything that happens. I want to know displacement, velocity, acceleration, horizontal, vertical, at the beginning, at the end, and all points in between. I want diagrams, equations, show me everything. We were stunned. I said to myself, focus, you got this. I applied myself to that problem meticulously, assiduously, relentlessly, and I didn't stop till I got to the end. I closed my answer booklet, I put my pencil down, I was done. I looked around. No one else was done. Well, I didn't feel like going over my work, and I certainly didn't feel like just sitting there. So I got up and I slipped my answer booklet on the professor's desk, and then I tried to sneak out of the room. But as I reached for that doorknob, I heard, Catella! All of a sudden, all eyes were on me. The professor said, come here. Now, I swore he was going to say, take this back and fix it. Don't make me fail you again. But instead, you know what he said to me? He said, you, my boy, are a success story. That moment changed everything. At that moment, I felt like I was just beginning to get a sense of what it takes to become an engineer. And it starts with earning the respect of your professor. Now, about a year later, I'm in analytic geometry and calculus. The professor walks in and says, okay, we have a 3-dimensional figure in space defined by this equation. We have another 3-dimensional figure in space defined by this equation. And our job is to determine the volume where these 2 figures come together. Again, we were stunned. The professor turned around. He starts scribbling frantically all over the board. He's drawing diagrams, deriving equations. He had the entire front board filled up with all these hieroglyphics. When he ran out of room, he went to the sideboard. He did the same thing over there. When he ran out of room, he went to the other sideboard. He did the same thing over there. And then all of a sudden, he draws a circle, drags the chalk across the entire wall to the other side, draws another circle, and he says, you plug that in there, and there's your answer. Any questions? Now, by this point, half of the class was asleep. The rest of us, our heads were spinning. But one person raised his hand, me. I said, excuse me, professor, but didn't you just find out the volume of the wrong piece? There was this awkward silence. He looked at me. Then he looked at his work. He turned back to me and he said, well, yeah, you're right, but you do it the same way. At that point, I felt that everything changed. I was now communicating on a peer level with my professor. We were speaking the same language. And you know what the best part was? I was the only one in the room who knew what he meant when you said you do it the same way. I had arrived as an engineer. Now, there are many lessons we can take from this story, but the overarching one is this: nothing focuses the mind like failure. Abraham Lincoln knew this. He ran for office half a dozen times and failed until he became president of the United States. Thomas Edison knew this. He failed thousands of times, and he was proud of it because he knew that every failure was just another step on the road to success. But my favorite example comes from the world of tennis. There's a man named Stan Wawrinka. He struggled more than 20 years trying to beat the best tennis players in the world, and he came up short every time. He was considered over the hill, past his prime. And then one day, he broke through. How did he do it? Well, maybe it had something to do with that tattoo on his arm. Quotation from Samuel Beckett. Ever failed? No matter. Try again, fail better. And so he did. He knew that smart people don't fear failure. They embrace failure. They use failure. They learn from failure. Because nothing focuses the mind like failure, and that is the awesome power of failure. Nothing focuses the mind like failure. Mr. Toastmaster.